Hello, it's a pleasure to be here for the launch of the Global Labor Resilience Index 2022. Now, what is the Global Labor Resilience Index? This is an index which measures the ability of labor markets to respond to different types of shocks, be they technological, health shocks, social shocks, economic shocks. And there's a number of different findings from this year's report. So I'd like to cover about 5 of those findings. Now, the first finding is that the countries which are the most resilient in their labor markets in the world have particularly strong emphasis and focus on people. They focus on their citizens, and this through the healthcare systems, the education systems, or the economic and social protection systems for labor. And in particular, in the education systems, it's not only primary, secondary, and tertiary, but also continuous education in supporting the people, in supporting the workers. A second important finding here is the all-importance of good and effective governance. Now, the top labor markets in the world and the countries behind them were supported by good and effective government. So this means, for example, in the case of the pandemic, rapid response teams with multidimensional capabilities, which were able to turn around and support, working with social and civil society, working with business to come out with responses to the economic and social dimensions of this pandemic. A third is there are different types of capabilities required to be resilient. And you have absorptive capabilities, adaptive capabilities, and transformative. So for instance, the European countries have been particularly strong on absorption through the healthcare system, which is very strong, the educational system, which is excellent, and also the labor protection systems. These systems that are in place were able to help the countries absorb the shock that came from something like the pandemic that we saw over the last 2 years. Now, on the other hand, the United States has stood out in its ability to adapt, and namely through economic development, entrepreneurship, and business creation. And you saw this, for instance, that more than 50% increase in the number of company creations between 2019 and 2021 in the United States as one of the measures of this ability to adapt to a shock, even though the United States really suffered quite a bit in that absorption with the number of jobs that were lost and the number of resignations that we saw in the country. And then there's a third capability here, which is very important, which is the transformative capability. And again, we come back to Europe, where the EU, through its Green Deal, or the UK, through its green bonds, is thinking about the longer term. It's thinking about the next 10 to 20 years and investing in green. And so this means sustainable infrastructure, it means renewable energies, it means all types of investment which are contributing to going green. And going green is associated to new forms of capabilities, higher value added capabilities for workers, and therefore making those countries more resilient for the future. Now, a fourth finding here is that resilience, labor market resilience, is not innate. It's like a muscle that you can build over time. And even the strongest countries, like I mentioned Germany earlier on, which is third overall in the index. Germany is a country which is strong because of economic complexity, because it has a very strong trading system, because it has excellent vocational education and training, very strong labor protection facilities. However, it's also not as good in the area of gender. It's 46 in the index in terms of the integration of women in the labor force, or participation in the labor force, and 32nd only on the gender pay gap. So clearly an area for improvement. Another area for improvement is on entrepreneurship, where Germany ranks below the average of OECD countries in terms of time and cost to start a business. And there's a word actually in the GLRI, which is what we call the labor resilience gap. The labor resilience gap, which is the difference between the structural score and the cyclical score for an overall score. So you take an example like India. it has an overall score of 65. Its structural score is 26, so structural related to things like economic complexity, economic diversification, which is strong in India. However, its cyclical score is 90, and this is shorter-term policies around entrepreneurship, around education, around labor, things that can be changed. And so that fourth point is this resilience, this labor market resilience. It's a muscle that can be improved, that can be developed, and countries with high labor resilience gaps have an opportunity to improve their labor market resilience. Final point here relates to trade and the all-importance of trade and labor market resilience. In fact, many of the most open economies of the world, including Finland, New Zealand, Singapore, which ranks among the top 5, are also countries with high levels of labor market resilience. And this is related to several factors. First of all, the trade, when you're a strong trading nation and highly diversified trading nation, you're less dependent on supply chain shocks that we've seen happen, namely during this pandemic. You can move from one supply chain to another because you have that diversity, that diversification. A second is that trade is a fundamental engine for growth, right? In the GDP equation, where you have GDP, is C plus I plus G plus X minus M, that X, the exports, is a key engine for growth. And growth means more employment and more labor resilience. And third, trade is about competitiveness. When you are a strong trading nation, you have to compete with other nations, and you have to have higher value for your exports relative to other nations. And so that builds capabilities for people, for workers, and those capabilities transform into greater resilience. And actually, some nations have even been strengthening their trade capabilities over time. One example is the World Logistics Passport, with the UAE and 25 other hubs around the world, which are offering incentives, financial and non-financial, for companies to trade more through those hubs, through airports, through ports, through customs. All of these are providing different incentives, and everyone wins, everyone gains. And actually, trade routes are further diversified through this process. You can look it up, worldlogisticspassport.com. So those are 5 insights from this year's report, the Global Labor Resilience Index 2022. And to close, I would like to emphasize one particular word, which you heard throughout, which is capabilities. Capabilities are key for greater resilience, and capabilities can be improved. It's a muscle that can be developed, and all countries, whether they be at the top of the index or in the lower parts of the index, want to be using this index to see what are the types of muscles they want to improve in order to become more resilient in the future.